Hello all, I'm Kel Kidman and welcome to Breaking Out the Daily, where today we're going to begin with Tucker Carlson versus the military. There's been a whole lot that's been going on. This has been really just a saga. So it actually begins with Tucker making some comments that were extremely obvious about pregnant women in the military and the idea of having pregnant and maternity flight suits, which were very obvious comments that pregnant women should not be on the front lines and should not be involved in combat in the military and should probably not be involved in the military almost at all. Of course, then the military leaders, which have gone surprisingly woke in the past few weeks and months since Biden's gotten to office, predictably complain. And they complained about this, about how, oh no, he's being all misogynistic and whatnot, and, you know, that didn't exactly go well for them, because it wasn't well received. You see, many people were like, why are you even talking about this? Why is a military leader wasting their time talking about Tucker Carlson instead of dealing with, I don't know, China or something like that? And then, of course, this is something that actually happened on Twitter. A comment that essentially I was paraphrasing there was replied to by the military saying, well, it's important. And then, of course, the guy had one of the greatest comebacks ever. Just stop focusing on me and actually focus on China. I really like how he held that line there. It was pretty good. And, you know, this really didn't go well. And Tucker calls back and it's just like, this is obviously nonsense. And these people couldn't defeat the Taliban and all that sort of stuff because he was making extremely obvious arguments. And the military was actually pulling rank a bit on Tucker Carlson in their original statement, where they were actually claiming that, well, Tucker doesn't have any military experience, so he can't talk about these things. Well, here's the thing. Tucker may not have military experience, and I may not have military experience, and many of the people talking about this particular issue may not have military experience. That is true. However, we have something that you, at least through observational powers that I have, I can make it known to myself that you do not have. And that is eyes. I have eyes. So does Tucker Carlson. And so does everyone else complaining about this stupid policy you're doing with regard to maternity in the military. Pregnant women are not good at doing things which are physical. They can't lean down. And you know, it's not their fault. If you had a child strapped to your stomach for 24/7, I'm sure you would have a tough time leaning down as well. You'd probably have a few emotional problems too, considering the child would be complaining to you constantly. So I'm not bashing the people who are pregnant. They're doing something amazing. All right? That is an amazing thing that can be done. But are they good at doing things like leaning down or flying fighter jets? No. I don't know why this needs to be explained, but it seems that the more credentialed you get, the less it is you have the ability to see things with your eyes and then acknowledge that some things are out of whack, such as pregnant women being in the military. That's fairly obvious. Put them on leave. Make them do something else. Take them off duty. Okay, that is totally fine. I am pro that. That is good for motherhood. That is good for all of that sort of stuff. You shouldn't be pregnant in the military. You also shouldn't have, by the way, you shouldn't be having children at home that are less than, I'd say, around 7 or so, and be in the military. All right, you should be with your kids at that point, especially if you're a mother. Especially if you're a mother. With fathers, it's a bit different. Obviously, for very obvious, I hope, reasons. To anyone who has eyes, once again, you'll be able to tell. It should be obvious there. And this, man, the military has been a train wreck all around, because they were doing war games just a minute ago, or just a few days ago, I think. I don't remember exactly the time frame. But they were doing war games, and they were thinking about what would happen if China invaded the U.S. And they said, well, we'd lose. Which I find to be an utter insanity, considering that if they tried to do a ground invasion of the U.S., they'd just get shot by every person in sight. The old-time logic that it is almost impossible to actually do a ground invasion of America because there are so many weapons, it still applies, all right? Maybe the coasts would fall. I'll give that to you. They'd have featureless weapons over in California and much of the East Coast. So, if maybe we'll give you the coast. But, once you get past around 10 miles in, once you get past California and the like, you're suddenly starting to deal with people who, have firearms that work in art atrocities. So that would be a lot better. And I don't think that's going to end well for China. So I'm not sure about the efficacy of this war game. But assuming that it is, actually useful, and they're actually speaking to something that's real, that's not good. And focusing on this particular issue is not a good sign. And it's telling as well that the military is at least partially backed off on this, taking back some of the statements and whatnot. And because it really did not show well on them, this whole ordeal. But really, this isn't even the only disaster of the Biden administration. Of course, we should go back to the border issue that has been, once again, just completely ravaging the southern border. And there's been a lot of problems. But the newest update that I've seen, at least, is Nancy Pelosi said something incredibly stupid and blamed it on Trump. Which just, really? We're already starting this? We're already going to start the whole cycle of blaming every single bad thing that happens on Republicans and every good thing that happens on Democrats? Are we really doing this? Is it really something where all of these things that go bad are Republicans? And this isn't the only example. They've been blaming all sorts of things that went bad during an administration on Republicans. They blamed every single bad thing that happened during the Obama administration, going on 7 freaking years in, on Bush. They've blamed many things on the first Bush, when Clinton was in office. They've been doing this for so long, and there is an obvious problem with this argument, and that is it lacks a understanding of cause and effect in policy. It's not that Trump kept the border completely under control for all of his presidency with much lower numbers all throughout up until the very end, and only when Biden gets in the office, everything falls apart. No one has that good of timing. If this was a problem of the Trump administration, you would have seen the seeds of it being planted then, and you would have been able to point to a specific policy which actually caused the problem we're having now. Take, for example, the housing crisis back in 2008. That is something that can be very easily blamed on a Clinton policy, that being subprime mortgages. It's a very well-known thing in economic circles, and was fairly obvious even going around 5 years before it even happened. People were already predicting that. And there's a very clear cause and effect there. Incentivizing people to go into loans that are not going to be paid back, or at least have a lower chance of being paid back, eventually is going to bite them in the rear. It eventually is going to come back and cause a whole lot of problems. And it did. That's what happened in 2008. You can't really blame that on Bush. You can blame it on him in that he didn't actually repeal it and didn't stop doing it to prevent that the final outcome from happening at least as bad as it did ultimately. But you can't blame the genesis of that problem on Bush, because there's a clear cause and effect. What is the cause and effect of Trump preventing illegal immigration, and then Biden coming in and immediately signaling to the illegal immigrants that, yeah, come in, we'll give you amnesty maybe in 8 years, maybe. If, Republicans don't get in that time, which, laughing stock, really. It's just not going to happen. That is one of the problems. And they're going to continue to do this, obviously. If there's any problems that occur during the Biden administration that they cannot properly cover up, they will inevitably blame it on Trump. Take, for example, and this is something that I'm a bit predictive on because they aren't doing this quite yet, but take, for example, the rising gas prices. Gas prices were low all throughout the Trump administration, whether it was during the very good economy in 2019 and before, or it's during the very bad economy because of coronavirus and the purposeful shutdowns of economies in places like New York and such. Throughout all of that, gas prices were fairly low, especially considering the era beforehand with Obama, where it was much, much higher. And immediately, once Joe Biden gets into office, once again, the gas prices start shooting up. And at this point, people are claiming, well, no. Rising gas prices actually means the economy's getting better. Because they're idiots. People don't realize a lot of how the gas prices actually work. Because here's the thing. Gas prices are all a lot like food prices. If food prices are really high, that's a sign of economic strife. Because here's the thing. Demand for gas is fairly consistent. It may rise over time, and it does rise over time. But its rise is fairly consistent with the populace and the economic growth of the populace. What the problem generally is whenever gas prices is going up has nothing to do with demand, but rather supply. When the gas is difficult to get there, or there isn't enough gas to go around, that's when gas prices goes up. It's not because of demand. And in this case, there's some fairly obvious policies that Biden has already signaled or put into place, which make it clear, at least to the gas companies, that they're not going to be able to do everything they are. So they're limiting the supply that's in place. Or the supply simply isn't there. Take the Keystone XL pipeline banning, or preventing. Like, shutting down that pipeline prevented a whole lot of things. And that's not all. Biden's been doing a whole lot of anti-energy policies, and he's been putting them into place since day one. So who's to blame? The guy who's putting in anti-energy policies, which are inevitably going to raise prices, or the guy who didn't do that and had low gas prices throughout literally his entire administration until the moment the next guy gets in? Things aren't perfectly timed like that. People seem to think that somehow Trump has this magical ability to keep things completely under control all throughout his presidency, with everything going completely fine, but only when Biden gets in and timing it perfectly, he makes it so that it collapses right at that second, which is hilarious. People claim the same thing about the vaccine, saying that Trump didn't have a plan to get the vaccine out, despite the fact that he was giving out 1 million doses of vaccine every single day, and that Biden didn't even up the amount of vaccine that was being distributed until about a month and a half into his presidency, around the time that they can actually ramp up production naturally, meaning that it had nothing to do with planning on the government's part at all, but rather the actual companies themselves upping production. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's totally Trump's fault, because he didn't have a stockpile, you see. That was a funny bit of framing. It was utter nonsense, because they didn't actually increase dosage, and having a stockpile of vaccine isn't even useful. You should just give it out. This is sort of an urgency thing, right? Wouldn't that be what the vaccine should be? Urgency? We get it out to as many people as possible, as fast as possible? But that's how the Biden administration was framing it, of course, and many people went along with that. And, I want to know what you guys think about these two last stories. I want to know as well whether you think that the sort of woke military had anything to do with Trump's particular policies or his administration. Of course, I don't think that he necessarily had any hand in it, seeing as he did ban woke training, I think, in the military while he was president. But I want to ask, do you think that some of these seeds were sown then? Or how far back you think these seeds were sown? And the same goes with the border stuff. Do you think that it had anything to do with Trump? Or do you have any specific policies you could point to? Because, of course, I could be missing something here, but I want to see what you guys think about it. Or, how do you feel about this particular argument? Do you think it's generally used as a straw man, or can it be used in a legitimate way, as with the Clinton and Bush example I gave earlier? I do want to hear about that. However, moving on to our next story and our next set of stories, we have Coke's FEALTY test, because Twitter has really freaked out on Coca-Cola just a bit, because, well, Coca-Cola is stationed in Georgia. And for those of you who would know, if you've been watching my show, you'll know that Georgia is actually in the middle of passing voter fraud restrictions. They are passing fraud suppression. It's wonderful. It's a very good bill. It's preventing things like absentee balloting without signature matches, or just no excuse for absentee voting. And they're implementing voter ID, very broad voter ID, allowing actually very loose and very permissive voter ID, allowing essentially any government documents to be used as that, but voter ID nonetheless. And it's going to help a lot in terms of suppressing voter fraud. And this is a very good thing. Of course, what does this have to do with Coca-Cola? You wouldn't think it would have anything to do with Coca-Cola, as Coca-Cola normally wouldn't be involved in such things like politics. But Coke has recently come out as woke, and they have been doing this with having teaching materials within their employee training sessions, saying things like be less white and all that sort of stuff. And they've been signaling a lot about the woke agenda and wanting to support such. Now, the problem that comes about is that some of the people who were pushing this law actually were donated to by Coca-Cola. And as I'm sure you can imagine, the Twitter wokesters weren't exactly happy about that. You see, they freaked out because they thought they're supporting voter suppression. They're supporting the suppression of black voters because they can't get IDs. Of course, completely ignoring the absolute racism of believing that black voters cannot get a driver's license. Like, what? Do you think black people can't drive? Do you think black people can't get a paycheck? What is your issue, is my question to these people. It is insane to me that this sort of thing is happening. Because these are kind of innocuous donations. It's kind of the normal thing for a company that is posted in a particular place to donate to some of the local politicians to prevent themselves from being hammered down with regulations. Not something I particularly like, of course, as I don't like the sort of government regulations that can be put into place if this doesn't happen, but it is a necessity, and I fully accept such. So complaining about this sort of thing is kind of strange, unless you come from a woke perspective, because these people want to take over every aspect of life and turn it into a political statement, and this is simply another aspect of such. They are taking the fact that, quote, did something that most every corporation does do, and they're turning it into an explicitly political statement. And a lot of this, I think, is spurred on, at least partially, by the failure of H.R. 1, or the prospective failure of H.R. 1, because H.R. 1 does not have the votes in the Senate to pass. And this has gotten to the point where even the New York Times is trying to clamor for the revoking of the filibuster in response to this. Because Democrats know if H.R. 1 gets in, it will essentially be one-party rule for the rest of time. Assuming it first of all, gets passed. Second of all, doesn't get knocked down in court. Third of all, the states actually listen to them, which is a whole lot of ifs. But particularly the ones on the delusional grift left who believe things like all corporations need to swear fealty to the one-party rule to the Democrats. People who believe things like that are obviously going to have a whole lot of wishful thinking in their particular analysis of any given policy, and this is a good example of such. Now, this has happened a lot, and I am not a fan of all of this. H.R. 1 is a terrible bill. I do not expect it to pass, of course, and I do not expect it, if it does pass, because they get rid of the filibuster or enough rhinos jump ship. I expect it to be knocked down in court, because even though the court has been an absolutely awful place, and I have been clamoring for the changes in the court, particularly impeachments of particular justices like Roberts, all throughout my existence on any video sharing platform, despite all of that, I still have a belief that this will get knocked down, or it will be simply ignored by the states. A lot of these things, I think, will happen. However, moving on to our last story, and more Twitter nonsense. The Twitter sphere has freaked out over a GOP congresswoman because they say that she voted against the $1.9 trillion pork bill. Because she was saying that she was so proud, particularly Rep. Maria, forgive me for the pronunciation, by the way, Elrifa Salaza has claimed that her bipartisan bill was implemented in policy by was implemented, essentially. And Well, Twitter freaks out. They're like, wait. You voted against the $1.9 trillion pork bill. How dare you do this? And I saw this trend when it was happening, actually, and I didn't look into it. I figured that someone had said something stupid. I don't know. I didn't look into it. But if Twitter was right and they are and this woman didn't actually vote for something that she claimed to vote for, that's absolutely awful. I do not like that. That's not good. You're just following the politics. Let's read this statement. Let's look at what exactly was being said. All right. Many of our local job creators applied for EIDL loans at the beginning of the outbreak, and yet the pandemic has continued to take a devastating toll on our small businesses. We cannot force our struggling small business owners to repay these loans at a time when many are barely able to keep their doors open. I am so proud that my bipartisan legislation has officially become SBA policy. Now, hold on a minute. She seemed to be speaking about something fairly specific there. She seemed to be talking about small business loans that were being put out from the government that she didn't want them to pay back. Now, apparently, Twitter failed to read. And this doesn't just go for a lot of Twitter randos. This goes for people like, CNN journalists. Some of whom were specifically called out for completely ignoring the point here. Because what this bill actually was, and what actually happened, just to give you the full context, was she was proposing that certain small business loans that were put up specifically for the pandemic will have their repayment dates pushed back because of the continuing lockdowns, and the fact of the matter is, that's kind of necessary, particularly in states which refuse to open up even after all this time. And what has happened is this has actually been put into policy by an executive branch. It wasn't actually passed through the House and the Senate, but it was put into policy. Which, hey, that's a win, and she took it as such. But hey, Twitter didn't read this. I don't think we can blame them, though, because Twitter really appeals to illiterates and people who can really only read 280 characters a day. These people are absolute masters at not understanding what words mean. You can see this all over the place if you've ever spent any sort of time on Twitter like I have. Anyone who's made great mistakes in their life will know that they don't understand words. They don't understand the definitions of words or what you're talking about if you're talking about something specific, because they'll just say, well, this thing that you're talking about specifically is tangentially related to this other thing, and this other thing doesn't apply to the point you were making about this thing, meaning you were speaking about this thing, and I'm going to berate you for your point not applying to this thing you weren't talking about, but which was tangentially related to the thing you were actually talking about. And so on and so forth. And they will continue to make this point over and over and over again ad infinitum. See also people who talk about intersex when talking about when the other people are talking about transgender issues. Same deal. Not actually the same issue, but we're going to talk about it again. That's exactly what these people do all the time. It's quite funny, actually. But you can't really blame them on Twitter. Because a lot of these people are just not all there mentally. I mean, they're hardly as there as, say, Biden is. Some of these people are so utterly unable to speak or write in any cognizant manner that they will say the most ridiculous nonsense and expect you to believe whatever you're saying and also understand it in the first place. They'll use many different ways of doing this, either lack of punctuation, random nonsense, extra words where there shouldn't be, random letters on the sides of words, because no one proofreads on Twitter. Heck, that's the whole point. And I think that's where I'm going to leave you guys off today. If you enjoyed the video, then go down and look and see if you're subscribed. If you aren't, then subscribe if you want. And also, look even deeper below for all of my sources that are down in the description. And even under that, there are many pretty links for all of you heathens on YouTube to go to any place that is better than this, which is literally any site that is under here. Also, in those very pretty links that are down in the description, we also have links to my Minds, my Parler, and my Gab, where I sometimes put on my thoughts, as well as my videos on Gab, Parler, and Minds, wherever else I put that. And, well, I'm Kel Kidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.